Madam Vice-Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, Carleton graduates, it's my great pleasure to present the Honourable Ed Broadbent for an honorary degree at this convocation. A remarkable thing happened in this country not 6 months ago. A minority Conservative government came within tea at Rideau Hall of being replaced by a consortium of opposition parties. The NDP, perennially a party of the opposition, a party of national conscience rather than governance, drove the notion of a coalition government and would have commanded seats at the federal cabinet table. It's probably only a matter of time before something like this actually comes to pass. We may be entering a period of rotating minority governments in this country. If the Liberals win the next election, they will almost certainly not do so with a majority. They will need the support of the NDP. And it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum, whether the idea of NDP influence on national priorities fills you with hope or drives you up the wall. Even the most partisan know that what is essential to liberal democracy is the full expression of the entire range of political conviction. That means we need a party of the left. And it should be as well organized, competently run, true to its convictions, and inspiringly led as any of its opponents. If the NDP is well positioned today in federal politics, it is in large measure because of Ed Broadbent. He set the party on the footing it needed. He was the leader of the NDP from 1975 until 1989. He was everything we hope for in our political leaders. Someone of incisive intelligence, astute judgment, and unimpeachable character. It didn't hurt also that he is very funny. Ed Broadbent influenced the course of this country and still does. Even if you disagree with his politics, you know in your heart he is a man of stature who has spent his life in the service of his fellow citizens. And by doing so, he has made this country a better place. He honors us by accepting this degree. Madam President and Vice-Chancellor, in recognition of an outstanding political career devoted to fairness and equality, I request that you confer the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, upon the Honourable Edward Broadbent.
By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Faculty Senate and the Board, I hereby grant you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, with all the rights, responsibilities, and privileges thereto pertaining. Congratulations. Dr. Broadbent. Oh.
Mr. Vice-Chancellor, Madam President, graduating class, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing I want to say is that Carleton University acts with incredible speed and perspicacity. For the first time in Canadian history, just yesterday, we elected an NDP government in Nova Scotia, and already you have an NDPer here addressing the graduating class. I'm delighted to be with you, and I do, of course, want to begin by congratulating all of you, young and old, who are graduating today. To receive an earned degree, of course, makes sense. After all, it requires diligence over a number of years of studying, of doing research, of writing successful examinations. However, to accept an honorary degree appears to me to be much more problematic. It's rather like one of those old movie directors whose work is a vague and distant memory and who then turn up an Oscar night in Hollywood to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. Personally, of course, for a politician, this is quite gratifying, standing before a large, polite, and captive audience, and then hearing nothing but good things said about you. For me, as a politician, this is rather unique. It's rather like hearing my obituary, as if it had been written by my mother. Of course, the real reason for accepting an honorary degree from Carleton is the very fact that it is an honor to be recognized for one's contribution to the public good. This is particularly so in the case of Carleton, a university which for many years has been a source of learning and inspiration for politicians, public servants, and journalists within and well beyond the nation's capital. I would add to this my personal appreciation for the pleasure I had a few years ago when I spent a year as a visiting fellow at the Arthur Kruger College of Public Affairs. It may or may not surprise you, but almost exactly 50 years ago to the day, I graduated from university. For all of us in the class of '59, that June day in Toronto was sunny in every respect. We were happy, not simply because of the supportive presence of family and friends, but because we knew in our bones that the days ahead at that time held great promise. Thanks to the work of our parents' generation, our formative years had taken place in Canada's most bountiful period. Not only had Canada achieved continuing economic growth since World War II, but much more significantly, a new notion of citizenship and the role of governments had begun to emerge. Following the Great Depression, governments in the post-war years had come to the realization that if markets were left on their own devices, inequality would grow, economic instability would be inevitable, and yet another economic crash was bound to happen. Instead of seeing Canadians simply as people pursuing their own well-being as individuals, government policy in this period became based on the realization that we individuals are also members of communities, that our social nature with its sharing and cooperative elements is just as important to a satisfactory life as is the pursuit of personal self-interest. Indeed, when it comes to citizenship, whether or not we human beings feel connected to others, whether we value only ourselves or also care for our neighbors, to be positively rooted in our social context is what matters most. During the 1960s and 1970s, my generation added to the foundation we had inherited. Canada's governments joined with other advanced democracies in building nations that took seriously the democratic goal of equality. By the 1980s, Canada had transformed itself through progressive taxation, unemployment insurance, Medicare, universal pensions, children's benefits, affordable universities, the rights of First Nation Canadians, women, gays, and ethnic minorities. We were becoming what we never were before, a sharing and caring nation where increasing equality was the name of the game. As I said, when I graduated in 1959, midway through this transformation, I could feel in my bones that this was unfolding. As a working-class kid from Oshawa, I believed that the world was my oyster. I could indeed develop my skills and talents. I could make my individual choices. I could study in Canada and in England. However, I came to understand that virtually all of my years of education, whether in Canada or in England, were financed by taxes paid by others. I learned that the increasing sense of dignity and confidence among Canadians that I could feel came not just from economic growth, but also from strong social programs based on equality. For millions of Canadians, our flourishing sense of self was the byproduct of social circumstances in which a positive role for government had become the norm. Your world, I regret to say, has been quite different. You're graduating not in the golden age of the long post-war boom, when markets were balanced with strong social programs, but in a moment of global economic crisis. Your moment in history is the culmination of what has been happening for the past 3 decades, when an ideology very different from the one I grew up with has been at work. Instead of seeing our identities as individuals thoroughly embedded in society, with all our individual rights and responsibilities linked inevitably to the lives of others, since the 1980s, Canadians have been encouraged to adopt a contrary view, to follow a personal agenda of individualistic materialism. This radical denial of the social aspects of our nature emerged in the Anglo-American countries in the 1980s and soon held sway over much, but not all of the world. Its advocates in the media and politics at home and abroad shaped our national and international institutions to reflect their narrow economic priorities. Interventions by governments were certainly welcomed if they helped to increase profits and the spread of unregulated markets. But government was no longer seen to be an essential component of finding solutions for a civilized life for the majority of citizens. Rather, government was portrayed as the source of our problems. Instead of seeing ourselves and thus our self-interest as being in part realized in sharing with others, the idea of self-interest was simplified and reduced to mean simply personal gratification. Cooperation was ignored or worse, dismissed as utopian. Greed, I speak frankly, was almost converted into a civic virtue. Thus, over time, the environment was brutalized and the rich got richer. Then, last year, this worship of the market all came crashing down. I need not bore you with many details, but most of which you will know. But I will emphasize a few. Inequality in Canada and the United States is the worst it's been since the 1920s. Millions globally are unemployed, and child poverty in our land, in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, is just as bad today as it was 20 years ago when Parliament voted to take steps to abolish it. Our production of greenhouse gases and the devouring of resources continues as if we didn't know the fatal consequences for our planet. I am mentioning these points, I want to emphasize, with a particular purpose. It is not to discourage, but to challenge. You do have more obstacles than my generation. But my point is change for the better is possible. What has been done can be undone. You and I live in a marvelous country with strong democratic traditions. And I say to you, as graduating students particularly, do not be intimidated. Today, look at those that are sitting beside you this afternoon, and remember you are among the fortunate, highly educated few in our country. I urge you to take up the challenge. Pursue not just personal success, but also the common good. See your neighbors not as competitors, but as friends. Regard your government not as your enemy, but as your instrument. Be inspired by great successes, because there are many of them. And when you have your celebrations later today, as you richly deserve, I urge you to think that you're succeeding today, yes, because of your individual success and effort, be it also because of the support of family, friends, and fellow citizens. Go forward, be brave, and like others in the past, make a better world. Thank you.